Hi everyone, I'm Testrun and this is 6 Signs. I am going to show you how I make a preset with it from the Init, and then it could sound maybe something like this. Very, very simple sound. Okay, and for that setup, I hooked up a little oscilloscope over here, so we can have a look at what's happening to the waveform, and that's about it. And let's just start from the Init. And you can see the sine wave. All right, and the first thing to do and the first thing to know is that your amplitude envelope is under main level. So when you click on that parameter, it brings up the user interface for the amplitude envelope and also LFO, but that doesn't matter for now. That is important because this one is the master. If you want any kind of release time, you have to set it over here. All right, and so each parameter, like decay and attack and release, have a wave shaper for the envelope curve. And by default it's linear. And if you crank it all the way to the left, you will get a exponential fall off. And that is very nice. So you get a very soft fall off. Yeah, there's that. And with the attack, it is kind of like that too. We have a linear ramp up. And if you crank it all the way to the left, you get a exponential ramp up. And that is also something very nice that I always have when I use any kind of attack. And most of the time I use any kind of attack, because if you put the attack to 0, hear the little click. Some sounds can benefit from it, but most of the time you want to avoid that. So I'm going to put it on like 3 milliseconds. That's fast enough without any kind of clicking. Okay, and then also here we have a velocity sensitivity dial, which we have nowhere else, only here. And you can crank that up too. Okay, so very important stuff. But because we're going to look at the waveforms for now, I'm going to set the sustain to 100% and give us a pretty quick release time. So makes it easier to look at the waveform. Okay. Now we have 6 operators here, and they all can be happily modulating each other, kind of. But it's quite fascinating what you can do with a single operator. And let's just have a quick look into its interface. Once you click on the dial, you get the interface for that operator 1. And this is all about pitch and the waveform itself. You have various waveforms here besides the sine. And then the moment you come to TX3, I click on it and you can see it here, TX3 to TX8, those are all waveforms that are really interesting once you do amplitude modulation. By themselves, they are not necessarily useful, or they don't seem useful. That's because they really are for the amplitude modulation stuff. And we hopefully get to that as well. So let's just stick with a sine wave. And you can change again the pitch here. For example, let's give it a bit of a there you go. You can change the envelope depth over here. Interesting for kick drums, of course. But that's more interesting once you do everything together. Right now it sounds like, what? That's not a kick drum. Okay, never mind. So that's the pitch stuff. Let's put that on 0, and we can ignore that without anything else dialed up. This won't do a thing. But if you use the LFO and you give the LFO a bit of depth, then you can use that envelope to modify how much the depth of the LFO is. For example, well, it's kind of funny this way around. Bit stupid, huh? So let's crank the sustain all the way to 100% and give it a bit of an attack. It's like a delay for the LFO. Kind of important, actually. All right, so there's that. And there are also phase offsets. And that phase offset also becomes more relevant later on. Right now, that's not relevant. I'm looking for a phase offset for the LFO, and I cannot see it. How do they? Is there one? LFO rate, LFO synth? There's no LFO phase. The phase here is, I think, for the waveform itself. So never mind that. Anyhow, so there's that. Okay, let's put that back on 0. So this is our operator 1 interface for the pitch and waveform. And what we have in the modulation matrix is only a feedback parameter. Now that is really fascinating, and now the oscilloscope becomes interesting. Let's have a look at what happens when we change that. Oh, and let me start by showing you a little funny problem that you may run into, and so you're well prepared when it happens. I'm going to play a note, I'm going to change the dial, and you will hear that nothing changes. That is because as the note plays, if you activate a parameter, this won't change the playing node. Once the parameter is active, then you can hear the change while you're playing the note. So this is something to be aware of, because that can get confusing. Maybe we will run into it later. If that happens where a note sort of won't ever get that parameter, you can go to settings and panic and sound off, and that clears everything, and it will then act as expected. All right. So let's have a look at the waveform as I crank up the feedback parameter. See, that turned from a sine wave into a saw wave-like thing. Let me increase that. And if you go the other way, it becomes more like a pulse wave. Anyhow, an interesting aspect of that is that it acts a little bit like a filter, as if you had a saw wave and then you would filter it. And what we can do with that is we can use its modulation GUI and envelope to do like a filter envelope. Crank up the decay. I'm going to make it softer. And there it is. And maybe we want that to be influenced by our key velocity. So then you go into modulation, you pick MIDI velocity and set it to envelope attenuation. So it is supposed to attenuate the envelope signal. As I play softly, let me just, of course, first crank it up. So if I play softly, the envelope has nearly no influence. But if I play it harder, okay, you see what it does. So there's that. And the other thing you can do, also kind of interesting with velocity, is you can modify the attack time. So for example, I can say, let's have a bit of an attack here. And let's say the velocity actually decreases, again, let's first pick the envelope attack, and the velocity decreases the attack time. So slow nodes have a slow attack, and fast nodes, or high velocity, a very sharp attack. If you want such a thing. Sometimes just in a subtle way is actually very, very neat to have that. Okay, yes, so there's that. And what else? Well, I have a whole bunch of other things here that we will ignore for now. What we do now is we're going to go through another thing that you really want when you have to do all sorts of instruments, and that is noise. And there's, as you may find out, no noise button here. But what we have is we have a feedback overcranking. And that is overdrive to 10 times. And I'm going to wind that back for a second like that. You see, it becomes like a noise. Let's turn this off. And we use the second operator. Bring up the level a bit. All right. Some random value. No, let's take an accurate value. 12 times. So these, like your dial value here is a scalar for the frequency. So it's not like a note offset like semitones. It scales the frequency. So for example, if you want an octave higher, you go times 2. Or 2 octaves higher would be times 4. Or 3 times 8. So you can imagine. Okay, so now we have our second operator that is many times higher. And we're gonna go into the feedback of it, and we tell it to have a 10 times overdrive and crank it all the way up. And immediately you have a noise. And if you reduce that, more of the actual frequency comes through. With a little bit of, oh my god, I hope that wasn't too terrifying. Anyhow, but with a little bit of fine sensors, you may actually get some interesting in-between sounds as well. If you wanted such things. Terrible. But now let's make this interesting. So we have the noise. Now let's go to our level for the operator 2, and again it has its own envelope and everything. So we're going to give it a sustain of 0, a bit of a decay, make it soft, and then we get a little tick in the beginning, like a keystroke. But when we play it softly, it's already very loud, and we can give this its own velocity sensitivity. And again, we use envelope attenuation. We attenuate that amount. And nothing seems to change, right? And now, it's very sensitive. Okay, so there's that. Alright, so I did promise or suggest that I will make a more complex, a tiny little prettier sound than just this. So let's go quickly into our level envelope, put the sustain to 0, K up to like 6 seconds is good, and a nice exponential fall off. Oh, it's long enough. And maybe we will use the LFO thingy, add a tiny little bit of it in there. Just a teeny tiny bit, maybe a bit faster. It's lively. And now we're going to go into settings and set the Unisono to 2. And instantly it becomes a bit more exciting. And we can do stuff like this. Great, isn't it? Okay, like that. But I can hear a bit of a nasty click in the beginning, eh? So let's fix that real quick. Ah, and we can do the velocity on attack. Very soft. And do MIDI velocity attack. Negative like that, maybe. Ah, interesting, but still a little, something's missing. Let's do a delay on the actual sound start. I'm exaggerating a bit. And you can hear that a click comes in because the amplitude is already up, but that operator 1 has an attack of 0, so that gives a click. We give it a little bit of a ramp up. Better. Also, of course, shorter. And we make the attack a bit steeper with the exponential curve. So now it sounds like there's just a little bit of delay between the clicking of the keys and the actual sound it generates. Yes, and so all of that with a phase modulation synthesizer without using phase modulation. Hooray! Okay, well, but that's just to get the basic sounds, to get a basic idea of how you can proceed with making a preset there. Those are some of the most important, to me, the most important features to get like an overall control over everything, envelopes and so forth, and all that kind of stuff. And I hope that helped you a little bit already. And maybe I make a second part if you want me to, where we can look into amplitude modulation, which is super exciting to me because there's actually more stuff you can achieve with that than you would maybe think in the beginning. It's like, oh, what's the big deal? But it's actually a very big deal. And then naturally also the phase modulation, but that stuff that scares me a little bit because it's easily to trite to like, oh yeah, I know that. And once you go into the more complex stuff of it, then it becomes difficult to describe what the heck you're doing. And yeah, actually, I should say it becomes difficult for me to describe it to you because I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So yeah. And even then it probably gets difficult. Even if I know what I'm doing, I probably won't be able to explain it properly. you tell me how I'm doing. All right. I say bye for now and have a lot of fun with 6 Signs, and check out KVR's One Synth Challenge. It's to me like a thing that I'm with for like almost a decade now. Absolutely love it. And I wouldn't want to miss a month, but I do plenty of them. And maybe I can pick up the pace and do a few more. And if you like this sort of thing here, like a little introduction to the current synth of the month, let me know, and I will see if I can find time to make a video if it's any good for you. All right, bye for now.